Welcome back to Between the Levees. I'm joined today by Miss Allison Baley. I discovered her on Facebook some time ago, not really knowing who she was, how she got where she is, but we'll get into all this. She is a SUNY grad, is also currently a steersman in our industry. Um, Over the last decade or so, she has worked in the maritime industry as a pilot, captain, chief mate, and second mate on various vessels, including the American Queen, the largest steamboat ever built. Allison, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Glad we could finally get this one lined up. I know we've been kind of playing hide and seek for a while here.
Yep.
Well, tell me first about the American Queen. I've seen a lot on Facebook lately of her sold and potentially becoming scrapped, but share what you can about her history and your time on her.
Well, the Queen was built actually around a 90-year-old steam plant off of the Dredge Kennedy. That's why it's so big, is they actually had to scale down the steam engines just a little bit, and they built the Queen around it. What they did was they took the most beautiful parts off of every steamboat in history, the J.M. White, the Natchez, several different steamships, and they compiled it together in the Queen, which is an unlimited tonnage. It was I believe, the biggest of the three: the Delta Queen, the Mississippi Queen, and the American Queen. Those three boats. It actually was the start of river cruising in America. Was for recreation, not for transportation. Was Mary Green, who had married into the Green family. She had her own steam pilot's license and then captain's license. She took over the Delta Queen, and that's where the Delta Queen Steamboat Company was spawned from. She would run river cruises, I believe, on the Ohio and the Tennessee River, and then that developed into the other boats. And they've had a long and rather difficult history, just economically. I know 9/11 had a big impact on them, and now COVID had a huge impact on them. So I I was working up in Teaneck, New Jersey for Cargill. I was helping in charter parties. I was helping move it through the process and kind of learning it. And the American Queen had a job listing pop up, and I applied, and a gentleman named Greg Brown gave me a call. I was sitting in a parking lot, and I told him more about the steamboats than he could tell me. And a month later, I was on board as a second mate, and I thought, man, I have my license. I know everything there is to know about ships, and I didn't know anything about boats, so it was an education. So, as far as I know, the Queen, the last I heard, it was moved over to Homa, and there wasn't a final decision on if it was going to be scrapped or refurbished. That's waiting on, I think, a decision from somebody up in Connecticut, the gentleman that owns American Cruise Lines.
Where did your fascination with steamboats and paddle wheelers in the rivers first originate?
I was a little kid. I think I was maybe 7 or 8, and my father was on a job site, and managed to get a tour of the Delta Queen for me and my sister. So he was a steam engineer, so he was all about that steam engine, and he was showing us, you know, all the ins and outs, and he was a really good engineer. And we managed to get just a quick peek in the wheelhouse, and I decided, well, I want to drive the boat, I don't want to work on them. So I like the sunlight, and I like being behind the wheel. So that's where I decided I was going to drive the boat. And he was skeptical, but he helped me as much as he could along the way.
Aside from that boat tour that day, was your father in the industry?
My father was in the industry. My dad actually graduated from SUNY in 1959 with a steam engines license, an engineering degree, and a billet with the Navy. He always told me, he said, I went up there and I interviewed, and I'm not sure exactly what happened, but they offered me a full scholarship. And I learned that day not to look the gift horse in the mouth. So he went straight into the Navy and then into the industry. He was actually one of the first engineers to be able to educate on nuclear engineering as well. He went through and got side degrees in nuclear engineering. He actually worked in South Africa converting their power plants from coal to nuclear energy. So he's had a long history. He worked on one of the classes of Great Lakes icebreakers. He actually was quoted in a book as a subject matter expert when the daughter of the original engineer on the SS United States was doing a history on that book. So on that ship, excuse me.
I believe you said a side degree in nuclear engineering.
Yes.
That's not a side degree I've ever considered.
For him at that point, he was an extremely bright man. He's somebody I still look up to today. He just was working in a glass factory one day, and somebody came in and said that they'd just been kicked out of SUNY, and that's where it all started. He said, well, I'm pretty good at math and science, and he was excellent at math and science. Went up there, and his first semester, he had a girlfriend, his first girlfriend, and got a 2.5. So he broke up with his girlfriend and popped his GPA from 2.5 to 4.2. And then it was all history from there.
You know, those pesky women distracting you from your studies.
Exactly. He worked his way, through. He actually had his own consulting engineering company as well. My mom was the one that started. She's got more of the mind for business, and they started it in the basement, and they're actually beating out GE and other major engineering companies for these consulting jobs.
You mentioned in our conversation prior to hitting record here this morning that he was born in 1937.
Yep, I was a second marriage baby for my dad. He was born in 37 in very rural Pennsylvania. He used to take the milk truck to school if he could catch a ride, and he remembers when his family first got a car, first got television. I mean, he was actually older than sliced bread and car registrations, and so he got to see a huge change in the country. He passed away in 2008. So it was just such a huge span that he was able to comment on regularly, and he did. He was a different sort of a guy. And then my mom, who she was born in 61 in Liverpool in England, completely different side of the spectrum. My mom went to Catholic school, got kicked out of Catholic school. She was graduated by the time she was 15 because she did not want to go back, and came over to Canada where she met my dad. And it was love at first sight. He managed to get, I think, a McDonald's to start up the milkshake machine because she felt like having a milkshake, and that was just what did it for her. So they got together, and she actually went through, and she's got an interesting history herself. She's a woman that's led many lives. She used to be the seamstress for the ice capades, and she worked with NASA. She worked as the head of the engineering firm that they started together. Then she took a different turn and went into bartending. She ran a bartending school local to us, and eventually that turned into working at a restaurant. And she went through a culinary program. She's absolutely, when I was growing up, she couldn't boil water, but now she's close to a 5-star chef. She's amazing in the kitchen. And recently she took on real estate, so she just is one of those master of all skills. So
That's pretty awesome. Fill me in on your childhood, you know, how you grew up, any siblings, how was school for you, and what eventually led you to SUNY?
well, I was the third of four. I have two older half brothers. They were 17 and 18 years old when I was born, and then I have a younger sister who I was raised with. She's 18 months apart. And in school, I was somewhat, I'll say quirky, but I was a very quiet kid, very reserved, very odd in my own way. I used to watch those American Pie movies, and they had all the parties, and I thought that was something that they just made up. Well, it turns out that it wasn't. I grew up, my husband was having those parties 5 miles away from where my house was, so it was pretty different. But I was in band, choir, Girl Scouts. I was the queen of the farm show actually for 2 years in a row. Which what else? I was in a whole bunch of stuff when I was growing up. I was the organist at my church. I was in a cantori group. I was just a joiner. like to participate in community events. The thing that really got me going to SUNY was it was local enough that I, could have my parents within an hour away from my school, but it was far enough away that I could have some independence.
And what prompted your going to SUNY?
Oh, going to SUNY, my dad said, you have all these options, but if you go to SUNY, I'll help you pay for it. And that really put my decision in focus for me. So I'm very happy that I did. He didn't never told me that there was any sort of physical education, PT. So as I was sitting in a field at 4:30 in the morning doing sit-ups, I was remembering to thank him for that later.
Financial security is an interesting burden, huh?
It is. It is.
Tell me about your experience at SUNY. Walk me through your time there. Of course, the C terms, I assume you did, and did your university schooling prepare you for what your career has become?
Well, at SUNY, most colleges have 12 credits a semester, 12 to 15. At SUNY, I was pulling in about 20. And that's because that path, the license path, is essentially a double major. I was a humanities major. It's a weird degree to have, but I have a Bachelor of Science in Humanities. And that's only because I have so many math and sciences associated with the license. It bumped it up. So I went through roughly 20 to 22 credits a semester, landside, and then I had a 6 credit summer C term, which was 60 days. Went to, gosh, probably 20, 25 countries by the time I had graduated. My favorite was Croatia. It was amazing to visit there. We were the first actually U.S. training ship ever to visit Turkey. We were part of a exchange program there. So I graduated, and it was a great program. I was part of the leadership program. So every year it was increasing leadership duties. During the school year, I was what's called a squad leader, or an IDO, indoctrination officer. So I had a whole group of incoming class freshmen to kind of mentor up to make sure that everybody stayed on the right path and everybody stayed, within the regimental guidelines. And then finally, my senior year, I was a company officer in charge of the band. It was our own company outside of the rest of the regiment. And I graduated, and license-wise, I was really great ocean going. It was very similar to what I've understood ocean sailing to be like. River wise, it was a whole different animal. It was something I never expected. The first day I signed on to the Queen, they had me run a bow line up to a tree to tie off, and that was just something that would have blown the mind of anybody ocean going comparatively. So it was definitely a different learning curve, but because I had been part of that mentorship program, and it's such a generational based industry, I was really able to find mentors in the river life that really took me under their wing and taught me what to look for, gave me their knowledge, and all that I was invaluable to me.
Walk me through your time on passenger vessels, including the American Queen, until you found yourself as a pilot trainee.
So on the Queen, I remember showing up, and I said, "All right, I'm here." And they said, "Okay, go be the mate." And that was essentially it. I had to hit the ground running on that job. So what I did was I relied upon the other mates and the other people that I'd worked with. I remember the first time, oh gosh, the first time the pilot had me steer, he had to use the restroom and came back. He said, "You go to the right, you go to the left, and hit that 5 times. If you get into trouble, I'll be back in 2 minutes." And he ran back and used the head and came right back. And that was exhilarating to me. So I needed to learn more so that I would be able to do that again. So the challenging parts with the passenger vessel inland is because it's unlimited, it's such a microscope from the Coast Guard and all the regulatory requirements for the unlimited tonnage vessels. So I really put myself to figuring those out, figuring out a daily checklist for myself, the requirements. I had worked with the chief mate at the time who was working on a streamlined inspection. So it really helped me find what I should be looking for, how it should be looking. And for some reason, I always ended up on the quarterly Coast Guard inspection. So I really got a lot of knowledge just by being in the room. The passenger vessel experience particularly is challenging because you have 160 crew members on that boat and 425 passengers. And it's just so many moving parts. Everybody's always working a separate shift, a different shift. There's conflict in the crew hold. And really what it came down to was creating a team with your deck crew and your bosun that you were working with, as well as the pilot. And it was just all based off of relationships, friendships, and professional relationships that really got me through. So about 6 months in, I had kind of been working with this gentleman named Joe Jamison, and he kept calling me Toots or honey or girl, and I was really starting to get upset about it. And I was this close to going up and telling him how I felt about it. And the bosun that I was working with named Angie, she stepped in and said, I think he might just have forgotten your name. And so it turns out that that was the case. So it was really a lesson in patience for me. And Joe and I worked together on that night shift for the next 2 or 3 years and really had a tight bond. He was definitely the first person I could say that saw something in me that could drive a boat and do what I'm doing now.
Any good stories from your time on those vessels about all that precious human cargo?
Oh, precious human cargo. Everybody, we used to do these pilot Q&As, and everybody always wanted to know the worst day on the boat, you know. And my go-to story always was the day that the ice cream machine broke, because I thought we were going to have a riot on board. But probably the most challenging day I think we had a fire in the port's stack. It had technically it hadn't ignited. It was a smoldering event. We extinguished it, and 12 hours later, we had a power failure, complete black ship underneath the Baton Rouge lower bridge, the I-10 bridge. And I was asleep in my room, and that air conditioning cut out, and that doesn't happen on those boats. So I knew exactly what was going to happen. I sat straight up, and I ran down to the bow, grabbed a life jacket, and I was down there just as they were hitting the anchor to let it go. Sparks were flying, and it caught in that revetment. No issues, not a single passenger was woken up by the entire event, and we just had the tug assist take us up to that Centraplex dock. It was probably the most jarring morning of my life. I was not until I was kind of shaking on the bow till I realized that it was raining. I was soaking wet. So that was an interesting morning. And then the passengers, my goodness, they all have the same jokes, but they're all hysterical. I really enjoyed spending time with them. There's passengers to this day that I exchange Christmas cards with. Everybody always says, you know, when I'm walking around the boat, well, if you're here, who's driving the boat? And they think it's hilarious. So I think I've heard that joke about 15,000 times in my life. And then the passengers, I mean, there was one lady that I met who was 92 years old, and she had 3 Cessnas, and every single morning she went out and fired one up and went flying. I thought that was great. I got to meet Kai Klessler, who is an author that I've followed for years. He wrote on the Queen. I got to meet Australians, New Zealanders, people from Japan. We had a full group from Japan that was on board, and it was just, you know, an interesting cruise, just being able to interact and speak with them. My very first captain's dinner that I did, officer's dinner, we had a lobster service, and I had my very own Pretty Woman moment, because the lobster hadn't quite been cut out of the shell. So I went to try and do it, and the whole thing launched across the room. And the waiter, Demetrius, grabbed a hold of it for me and took it away.
So now you're listed as steersman for ARTCO. Um, Before we get into that part of your career, you mentioned earlier that Captain referring to you as Toots and Honey and all. When I looked at your resume, do you feel any kind of way, one way or the other, about being called a steersman versus
I
steerswoman?
never did. However, Tiger's been really the gentleman that's steering me. He's been very good about correcting people. He refers to me as steerswoman every single time. And this is actually the very first place that has had female uniforms for me when I first started, which has been great. It's a small thing, but showing up and actually getting a uniform that fits correctly and is suited for me is such a great experience.
That's not something I'd have considered. Never even thought about that. But what prompted your jump to ARTCO, and then fill me in on your time with them so far?
Well, my jump to ARTCO was just it was mostly a matter of opportunity. They had the steersman program listed the advertisement, the job listing, which I answered, and I had a great advocate for me. A couple great references, I would say, that helped me along my way to getting into that position. Again, it's all based on relationships. Ultimately, it's who you are and your reputation, your history, your experience that gets you into the seat, into the foot into the door. Um, and what you do with it is up to you. So what really prompted me is just the opportunity. It's something I've always wanted to do. Uh, Steering on the Queen, driving the Queen, that was a great experience. It was a unique experience. Not many people can say that they've done it, but the heavy tow life, that is the hardest thing I think you can do on the river, and I know I can do it, and that's what I'm learning too.
When I messaged you a few weeks ago about this meeting, I think you mentioned you were behind 42 southbound to turn at Kenner Bend.
Uh, we do 42, I think is the max for the Crimson Gem, which is the boat that I normally ride. But gosh, we haven't really been up to that max in a couple months. And that would be northbound, I believe.
I think you were southbound above Natchez somewhere when I was bugging you.
Oh, okay.
I forget what the tow was, but anyway, whatever the case, I was watching, day one picture, day two sunset, day three sunrise, all that stuff following you downriver. It's really great. Um,
Those pictures
did,
actually are how I really figured out how to reach out to other captains and pilots. I just happened to accidentally post a picture of a sunset on LinkedIn one day, and I had such a great response. I had 2,500 views, 1,550 likes, 15 comments. So I decided to start doing that regularly. Whenever I could get a nice photo of a sunset or something interesting or a towboat, I did these different towboat pictures with the name underneath scrawled out, and the other operators out there, the other captains, the other pilots, they absolutely really responded. They liked that imagery getting promoted out in the world, something that we can only see. Very few other people get to see the river that way.
well, while at SUNY, did you have any time at the helm, or did the students not do that?
They did. The students completely ran the ship under the guidance of captains and mates. The Empire State, which is the school ship, had two bridges, the main bridge that was functional, and then an after training bridge. So you'd have two full watch teams, one just pretty much running a real life simulation, and the other one actually running the ship. I had a really unique experience. The Dardanelles, which connects the Mediterranean up through to the Black Sea, they have these hard turns that go through there that you're under the guidance of a pilot for. I got to be the helmsman on that particular trip. You get to go through. That's where the 300 that movie occurred, was right at there at the Dardanelles, the tight spot. And that ship was about 600 foot long. So
How well did your studies at SUNY prepare you for the career you followed?
I would say it was surprisingly helpful in certain situations. Um, right now, with especially with Subchapter M and the new regulations increasing inland, my history going through those tests for ocean going ships and going through I did a lot of maritime law, humanities electives at school. With all that as part of my background, I've been able to really apply it to uh, just my everyday perceptions of what I'm learning inland. It helps with decision making. It helps with everything. Right now, it's just getting a hands-on experience that I desperately was lacking from SUNY, but really definitely found on the Queen.
Well, I've asked this of other SUNY grads. What, I guess, potential do you have or do you see if you were to go before a board at SUNY and say, hey, look, we could use a few courses on the inland rivers, the barge industry? How would you recommend, or I guess what classes, what sort of training would have been helpful to you in your current roles?
More deck work, more time learning how to secure things, how all the lines work. You do have experience doing that. You do get that time in there, but just having more time with hands-on problem solving with deck work. I'd also say small boat handling, light boat handling, and facing up. We the ship, because of how it maneuvered, you came in very particularly. You came in with a ship with the tug assist, coming in under your own power and facing up to something, or operating with a single barge even is totally different experience, totally different response. I had a wheel the whole time. I Until I was on the Queen, I never had a rudder.
Yeah,
And I think really the way to hit it home with SUNY and all the academies is to tie it to the job growth potential, because there's such demand for experienced professional mariners inland. Like I've seen it for years now, is that they're looking for people, they're looking for candidates, they're always looking to grow uh, the talent pool. And I think that if the academies focused on inland just a little bit, just for one major or something, it would pay off greatly for their graduates.
well, how did you find yourself at ARTCO?
I found myself at ARTCO through a recommendation from a friend of mine. He sent me the application and I filled it out. At the time, I was actually working in New York City on the fast ferries, the passenger ferries uh, that Hornblower operated up there. And it was a great experience because literally 50 times a day I was going through and practicing facing up. And because of how the tide works in New York City, half of the day it was spent with a upstream, and the half of the day it was you're downstreaming. So it was just practice, practice, practice for what I eventually ended up doing with towboating, is practicing that light boat maneuver. So I filled out an application and I got my call back, and flew out for the interview. I had a video interview, and then I flew out for an in-person interview, and that's how I ended up with ARTCO.
Well, tell me about your time with them so far. Have you spent time on deck? I mean, are you out there laying wires, getting that experience, or has it all been in the wheelhouse?
Nope, it's absolutely been part of my instruction is to spend time on deck. Not nearly as much time, obviously, that I do in the wheelhouse, but I spend time out on deck. I went through their regular safety training that everybody through ARTCO goes through. Um, I I'm a perfectionist when it comes to my background knowledge, so I have every possible book that I can find. I sit there, I spend a lot of time just in the woodshed learning on my own. And then I also go through they have excellent mates and excellent deck crew. They make sure to, first off, keep me safe because I'm not as experienced as they are. And second off, they've been passing their knowledge along greatly for me.
What's the largest tow you've been behind?
We did 8 long northbound, 8 long, 5 wide. So that's what, 40? Yep.
You mentioned that the ship at SUNY was 600 feet. You said 8 long, so we're 1,000 feet more. And
Oh yeah.
how wide was the SUNY ship?
Oh gosh, I don't remember off the top of my head, but it was a old cargo ship from the 50s that had been converted.
Tell me about your experience behind 1,600 feet long by what, 180, 100, almost 200 feet wide?
It's definitely a different way of looking at the river than I'm used to. Um, Luckily, I have a lot of experience with a huge amount of the Inland River system. The Queen used to run from New Orleans all the way up to St. Paul. We'd run out to Pittsburgh, down to Nashville and Chattanooga. And then actually we went up to Ottawa, Illinois, on the Illinois River. So I have a lot of river knowledge. I've never done it on something the size of an aircraft carrier before. So that was a different experience. And also the Queen is all about keeping a schedule, and you're always on the go. Uh, the larger tows, there's more emphasis on fuel economy and pacing, and it was a different experience. I'm getting used to or accommodating for the set underneath points and different ways of approaching turns when you're going northbound instead of wrapping a point like I would on the Queen. You have to give yourself a little bit more swing room so you don't end up going across the river. That was different for me. But I've been under some great tutelage on the gem so far, and really tightening up my skills.
Well, in all your travels for work and otherwise, I guess, what's the prettiest places you've run and I guess your favorite place to be out there on the water?
Ooh, my favorite run, I would say, is probably from Block 5A up to Red Wing. It's just so pretty up there. I don't think I've ever had a bad day up there. It's just always been beautiful. It looks like dinosaurs should be walking out to the riverfront. It's so unspoiled. And then my other favorite run is from Cincinnati up to Pittsburgh, and that's because I normally get off in Pittsburgh, so it's closest to home for me. But I like it up there because all the ports are very close to the riverfront, and they're all Main Street America. So they're all very welcoming. It's all river towns. So
What was one of the most surprising things you saw once you got into the barge industry? And like what's the most challenging part of your job these days?
um, the challenging part, I guess, was that the Queen, the passenger boats, you always had such a diversity of problems to solve every single day. With the barges, it's focused on driving the boat, getting where you need to get safely, and you spend your 6 hours doing that, and when you're done, you really don't have that much uh, weighing on you. There's no, oh my gosh, I think we're gonna be late for this port, or are we gonna fit under this bridge, or et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, and the thing that surprised me the most is just how safe everything is. It's just the safety, the imperative of safety for the crew and the officers is really something that um, is a top focus for every boat that I've been on so far. You can really feel that priority.
More so than any previous career experience?
I would say so. I would say so. Yes.
I think that just about wraps up the questions for the industry and your career. I've got a few others that we may lose some viewers and listeners because it's not
Okay.
exactly industry related. But
Okay.
before we go into those, do you have any more interesting stories from your time out there? Anything else worthy of note that kind of sticks out when you think about your career?
There's an excitement of being able to learn something every single second of every single day. I'm somebody that I have a lot of different passions in my life, and I like to learn as much as I can. So I was able to, in the same year, figure out the distance between the top of the American Queen and a bridge within less than a foot of each other. so that we were beating this giant wave of water coming down out of the upper, and that we would make port on time, to the point that the passengers all came up and cheered every single time we went underneath the bridge on the upper before we made it to Red Wing. That was a great experience. And being able to physically measure all of those bridges was just a completely unique experience for me. And then going through and being able to work with so many different people of so many different backgrounds. I've been able to work and learn from towboaters and casino boat runners and passenger boat runners, and small boat runners, ferry boat operators. Just I had a gentleman that really mentored me a lot, who was a Navy radar operator at one point in his life, and just those little tidbits, those little pieces of non-tangible knowledge that I just managed to get from them every single time. I have a great big old book of all the notes that they've given me. That was probably my most valuable experience.
Well, and what's next for you? I think I saw on your LinkedIn profile, maybe staying a pilot, becoming a captain, or a port captain, something shoreside. What are you envisioning, I guess, for your future?
Envisioning my future, right now I'm focused on the here and now, getting the knowledge I need for the large tow and the towing industry. But one day I wouldn't write it off. I would like definitely to take the next step and become a captain. I'm not sure if I'd ever do the port captain job. I've really fallen in love with the go to work for a month and come home for a month lifestyle. But I have a couple other um, aspects to my life that I'd like to start to improve upon. My husband and I own a tool business, a tool operation. So he goes out and runs that 4 days a week, and then he's also a farmer. So it's pretty funny. My mom calls us surf and turf because I'm on the rivers and he's landside. But just improving and increasing some at-home scope.
Last couple of questions, and I think we can wrap this one up. Thank you again for doing this.
No problem.
Um, you mentioned earlier today in one of our conversations that you considered yourself, well, at least the self-proclaimed queen of the band geeks.
Oh yeah.
And you mentioned, of course, that you played the organ before and that you played the bassoon. What prompted your interest in music, and how long were you involved in that?
Oh gosh, I started in, I guess, fifth grade. The Mr. Wrestler was the band teacher, and he was the teacher that all the girls had a crush on. So I was just pretty much like all my classmates. We all wanted to be in the band because we had a crush on Mr. Wrestler. So I started off with the alto saxophone, and moved on to the tenor, and managed to get. I played the bassoon, obviously. Um, and then I also when we moved into our house, Mrs. Jehu, was the lady that we bought it from, found out that my parents had two daughters and said all young ladies should learn how to play the piano. So she left her piano and her electric organ for us, just as a gift. So that's what I took lessons from a gentleman named Ed Waymeyer, who was a one-man band. He could play absolutely anything on any instrument. He was part of an Elvis impersonation group. He he played weddings, he played funerals, he did everything. So he taught me the piano, and then brought me in. He was our church organist and the piano player for the church. So he taught me that. And then right now, what I'm trying to teach myself is the banjo, because my grandfather used to play it. He used to go out by the trees and play the banjo. He'd call us up and try and get onto the answering machine so he could leave a recording. It was his thing to do. So, and then I eventually, actually, I was part of the music union local here in Allentown, Pennsylvania. They have 4 bands, so they call it Music City. So I played with them for 4 years. My band teacher actually recommended me, so I started playing bassoon with them.
Is that where your music career kind of stopped, or where it exists now? Is it occasionally playing for
Oh
church and
gosh,
events?
no, I haven't played in a long time. What it transferred to was helping next generation. I don't have kids myself. It just never happened for me. But I am the extra person in a lot of other kids' lives. So I have 5 nieces, My very first nephew just came along last month, and I go through and I help to bring that knowledge to them, support them in their studies and their practicing. And then I also do my best to help bring them into different aspects of culture. So I take them up to musicals in the city, or musicals when they're done locally. I take them to different art shows, art museums.
Are any of them showing any interest in the industry? Does work
I
come
have,
up?
I have one niece who is very interested in that. Camellia, who's my oldest niece. She actually got to go down to the Queen when we were in Chattanooga, and I said, make a pose like a pilot. And she leaned back into the chair and held a hold of one of the rudders, and I said, that's perfect. So
Well, final question, just kind of random. I found it in my research from, I'm not even sure where, LinkedIn probably. But you mentioned a fluency in German.
I took 5 years of German, and then I did the school trip. I haven't used it in a long time, but I I I don't think I could speak it now. However, my husband does a lot of work with the Amish and the Mennonite community out in Pennsylvania, so I can make do enough to get a point across or understand what they're saying to me. But yep, I've spoken German in the past.
Actually, another question came to mind, actually. It's back to the career, back to the industry. You
Uh-huh.
mentioned really enjoying this, I guess, this 28 and 28 schedule that you have now.
Mhm.
What was the hitch like for the passenger vessels?
Passenger vessels was not really a regular rotation. I had signed on for a 4-and-4 rotation, and I really don't think until my last year with the passenger vessels, I don't think I'd ever actually gotten a 4-and-4 rotation. I'd always work like a 6-and-2 or a 6-and-3. Uh, over always extending that hitch just a little bit, and then over the winter holiday, usually just after New Year's till just after Mardi Gras, the boats would all be put into a layup status, and that's mostly because it's not the best weather to go cruising on the Mississippi River. So they all go into the layup status, and anybody who wasn't directly working on deck was going home on a seasonal layup or layoff. So you're always trying to save nuts for the winter. So that's what I would work those extra weeks if I could. I don't know if you can hear them, but I have 4 dogs with me today. I have 2 red bones, a tiny beagle, and a black standard poodle. They're all just locked in today. So,
And not sure if you heard mine barking at any
oh, I
point,
didn't.
but no, we have 4 here permanently.
Oh, okay.
Um, but Allison, thank you very much for doing this today. We'll keep in touch on Facebook. I'll be eager to watch for updates, and I'll look forward to maybe doing this again one day.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
This has been a production of Where You At Studios, LLC.